Ma'am, we're gonna need you to step away from the bench, now.
Before you make the biggest mistake of your careers, ask yourselves one question. Why would a newly appointed judge risk everything to threaten a man she's never spoken to before today?
Ma'am, we're gonna need you to step away from the bench, now.
Ma'am, we're going to need you to step away from the bench. Now. 2 police officers, hands near their holsters, walking toward her like she was a criminal, and she was wearing a judge's robe. In her own courtroom, behind her own bench, the man who called them sat at the defense table, smiling, arms crossed, confident. He'd just accused her of threatening him. His attorneys backed up the lie. A bribed clerk confirmed it. And now the police were here to arrest her. Judge Pamela Brown stood perfectly still, looked at the officers advancing toward her, looked at Gary Fleming's smug face, and then she raised one finger. The entire courtroom froze. "Before you make the biggest mistake of your careers," she said, her voice deadly calm, "ask yourselves one question. Why would a newly appointed judge risk everything to threaten a man she's never spoken to before today?" The officer hesitated. Pamela's finger shifted, now pointing directly at Gary Fleming. And why would a man accused of embezzling millions call the police on the one person who has the power to hold him accountable? The room went silent. Gary's smile faded. And what happened next changed everything. Before we go any further, let me just say, my beautiful family and friends, welcome back. If you're ready for another unforgettable story, do me a quick favor, hit that like button. Why? Because each like tells YouTube this story is worth sharing with more people who might really need it today. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I do read every single one, and it makes me feel like we're sitting together in the same room, sharing these moments heart to heart. And don't forget to share this video with someone you love. You never know, the story you share might be the encouragement they've been praying for. Most importantly, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a story when it drops. This isn't just a channel, it's a family. And when you engage, you're helping us build a safe space where real stories bring real hope. Now, let's begin. Courtroom 3B. Crestwood County Courthouse. Wednesday morning, 9:47 a.m. Judge Pamela Brown stepped through the heavy oak doors expecting order, expecting silence, expecting the respect that came with the robe she wore and the gavel she carried. But what she walked into was chaos. Whispers, shuffling papers, cold stares, and at the center of it all, Gary Fleming, hedge fund manager, accused of orchestrating a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. Sitting at the defense table with a smirk so confident, you'd think he owned the building. Maybe he thought he did. Pamela moved toward the bench. Steady, elegant, professional. And then Gary stood up. "Your Honor," he said, voice loud enough for the entire gallery to hear, "I need to report something before we begin." Pamela paused, looked at him, raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead, Mr. Fleming." And that's when he did it. "This woman," he pointed directly at her, "came into this courtroom earlier. She barged in, screamed at me and my legal team, threatened to destroy our careers if we didn't drop the case." Gasps filled the room. Pamela's jaw tightened, but she stayed calm. "Mr. Fleming, I just arrived. This is a blatant." "She's lying," one of his attorneys shouted, jumping to his feet. "We were terrified. She was completely out of control." Another attorney joined in. Then another. Voices overlapping. Hands gesturing wildly like they were victims of some terrible assault. And then, a clerk, seated near the back, nervously raised her hand. I saw it too," the clerk stammered. "Judge Brown was very aggressive." Pamela's eyes locked on that clerk. She knew, right then. She'd been bribed. But before Pamela could say a word, the courtroom doors swung open. 2 police officers walked in, hands near their holsters, eyes scanning the room, looking for a threat. And when they found who they were looking for, they looked directly at her. The lead officer stepped forward, tall, stone-faced, authority in every step. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and cold, "we've received multiple reports of judicial misconduct, threatening behavior. We're going to need you to step away from the bench." Pamela stood there, in her robe, behind her bench, gavel in hand. And these officers, sworn to protect the law, were about to remove her from her courtroom. "Officer," Pamela said, her voice steady as steel, "I am Judge Pamela Brown. I was just appointed to this bench. I arrived less than 5 minutes ago. Whatever you were told is a lie. Ma'am, we're just doing our job. Multiple witnesses have corroborated the story. Now please," he gestured toward the door, "step away from the bench." The second officer moved closer, hand hovering near his cuffs. Gary Fleming leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smiling. He thought he'd won. The entire courtroom held its breath. And that's when Pamela raised her hand. Not to surrender. Not to comply. She raised one finger. Sharp. Commanding. Pointed directly at the clerk who had lied. "Stop." One word. But it carried the weight of a courtroom. Of a lifetime of fighting to be heard. Of every ounce of authority she had earned. The officers froze. The room went silent. Pamela's finger didn't waver. "You," she said, eyes locked on the trembling clerk. "Stand up. Right now." The clerk's face went pale. Pamela turned to the officers. Calm. Controlled. Unshakable. "Before you make the biggest mistake of your careers, I suggest you ask yourselves one question. Why would a newly appointed judge risk everything to threaten a defendant in a case she was assigned less than 48 hours ago?" The lead officer hesitated. "And why," Pamela continued, "would a man accused of embezzling millions of dollars, a man with known political connections and a history of manipulating the system, why would he call the police on the one person with the authority to hold him accountable?" The second officer glanced at his partner. Doubt flickered across his face. Pamela's finger shifted, now pointing at Gary. "You didn't call them because you were afraid of me, Mr. Fleming." Her voice was quiet, deadly. "You called them because you're guilty. And today, you ran out of places to hide." Gary's smirk faltered. But here's what Gary Fleming didn't know. What no one in that courtroom knew. Pamela Brown didn't walk into courtroom 3B unprepared. She didn't just react to his lies. She'd been expecting them. Because 3 weeks before this moment, before the accusation, before the officers, before the chaos, Pamela had been building a case. Not just against Gary Fleming. Against everyone who helped him. And what she uncovered was bigger than anyone imagined. See, the moment Pamela was assigned case number 11-47B, People vs. Gary Fleming, she did what she always does. She read everything, every filing, every motion, every piece of evidence submitted by both sides. And something didn't add up. Timestamps that didn't match. Evidence logs that had been altered. Filings submitted after hours by people who shouldn't have had access. Most judges would have missed it. But Pamela wasn't most judges. She'd spent years as a public defender watching the system get manipulated by people with money and power. She knew what corruption looked like. And Gary Fleming's case reeked of it. So she made a decision. A risky one. She was going to investigate. Quietly. Carefully. And she was going to need help. Let's rewind. Let's talk about the audit no one expected. The people Pamela trusted when everyone else doubted her. and the evidence she gathered that would bring Gary Fleming, and everyone who helped him, to their knees. Because when Pamela Brown said, "You called the police on the wrong woman," she meant it. 2.5 weeks before the courtroom confrontation. Judge Pamela Brown's chambers. 11:47 p.m. The courthouse was empty. Quiet. Just the hum of the heating system and the distant echo of a janitor's cart rolling down the hallway. Pamela sat at her desk, surrounded by file boxes. Case documents spread across every surface. A half-empty cup of cold coffee beside her laptop. Her eyes scanned the screen. Evidence log, submitted by defense counsel, Gary Fleming case. She clicked through the timestamps. March 14th, 9:47 p.m., evidence file uploaded. March 14th, 9:52 p.m., evidence file modified. March 14th, 10:03 p.m., evidence file re-uploaded. Pamela frowned. The courthouse digital filing system locked down at 6 p.m. Only court administrators and IT staff had after-hours access. Defense attorneys didn't. She opened another file. March 18th, 11:23 p.m., document filed by defense. March 18th, 11:31 p.m., document edited. March 18th, 11:45 p.m., document certified by clerk. What clerk was working at 11:45 at night? Pamela leaned back in her chair. Stared at the ceiling. This wasn't sloppy work. This was intentional. Someone was helping Gary Fleming from the inside. She picked up her phone. Hesitated. Then dialed. It rang 3 times. Judge Brown. The voice on the other end was surprised. "It's almost midnight. Everything okay?" "Marcus," Pamela said quietly, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me." Bailiff Marcus Hale had worked in Crestwood County Courthouse for 12 years. He'd seen judges come and go. Seen cases won and lost. Seen corruption swept under rugs. But when Pamela Brown got appointed, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "Of course, Your Honor. What do you need?" Pamela took a breath. "If I told you I suspected evidence tampering in the Fleming case, would you help me prove it?" Silence. Then, "What do you need me to do?" Over the next 2 weeks, Pamela built a team. Small. Loyal. People who believed in justice more than politics. Marcus Hale, the bailiff who'd watched too many guilty people walk free. He knew the courthouse inside and out. He knew who could be trusted. Rebecca Collins, the district attorney. Sharp. Ambitious. Torn between doing what was right and protecting her career. She'd prosecuted Gary Fleming's case, but something about the way it was falling apart didn't sit right with her. And Sophia Martinez, a young law clerk assigned to Pamela's chambers. Brilliant. Overworked. Underpaid. And terrified of what she'd seen happening behind closed doors. Pamela called them into her chambers one evening after the courthouse had emptied. She locked the door. Spread the evidence across her desk. "Thank you all for coming," Pamela said. "What I'm about to show you could end my career. Or it could save it. Either way, I need you to know, if you help me, there will be consequences. People will come after you. Powerful people." Marcus crossed his arms. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I didn't take this job to protect powerful people. I took it to protect justice." Rebecca nodded slowly. "If what you're saying is true, we have to act. But we need proof. Real proof." Sophia's hands trembled as she looked at the files. "Judge Brown. I think I know who's been helping him." Everyone turned to her. She swallowed hard. "There's a clerk. Angela Persons. She's been working late nights. I thought she was just dedicated, but I saw her meeting with one of Fleming's attorneys in the parking garage 2 weeks ago. They didn't see me." Pamela's jaw tightened. Did you hear what they said? No. But she handed him something. An envelope. Marcus leaned forward. That's the same clerk who's been filing Fleming's motions after hours. Pamela nodded. Then we need an audit. Full digital forensics. Every login. Every file access. Every communication. Rebecca hesitated. Judge Brown, if you order an audit without probable cause, they'll accuse you of bias. Of targeting Fleming. I know, Pamela said. But if I'm right, and I do nothing? He walks. And everyone who helped him gets away with it. She looked each of them in the eye. I didn't become a judge to play it safe. I became a judge to hold people accountable. Even when it's hard. Even when it's risky. Marcus smiled. Then let's get to work. Over the next 10 days, they worked in secret. Pamela submitted a formal request to the courthouse IT department for a routine security audit, something judges were allowed to do under administrative protocols. No one questioned it. The IT team pulled the logs. And what they found was damning. Unauthorized logins from Angela Person's account at 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m., times she wasn't scheduled to work. File modifications on evidence submitted in the Fleming case, changes made after they were certified. Deleted communication records between clerks and defense attorneys. And the smoking gun. Financial transfers. Small amounts. $2,000 here. $3,500 there. Deposited into Angela Person's account from a shell company linked to Gary Fleming's hedge fund. Rebecca stared at the documents, stunned. This is bribery. Obstruction. Evidence tampering. Judge Brown, this is enough too. Not yet, Pamela interrupted. If we move now, his legal team will claim the audit was biased. We need to wait. Let him make his next move. Sophia looked worried. What if his next move is against you? Pamela met her eyes. Then we'll be ready. And that's exactly what happened. 3 days later, Pamela walked into courtroom 3B for what was supposed to be a routine pre-hearing. And Gary Fleming was waiting. With his lies. His attorneys. His bribed clerk. And his plan to destroy her. But what Gary didn't know was that Pamela had spent the last 2 weeks building a case against him. And when he called those officers into that courtroom, he handed her exactly what she needed. Witnesses. Back in that courtroom. Officers frozen. Gary's smirk fading. The clerk trembling. Pamela's finger still raised. And then she said the words that changed everything. Officer, before you make a decision you'll regret, I suggest you check with your Internal Affairs Division. Ask them about Case File 11-47B. Ask them about the audit I ordered 3 weeks ago. The lead officer's radio crackled. He pressed it to his ear. Unit 14, this is dispatch. Internal Affairs confirms an active investigation related to Judge Brown's courtroom. Stand by for instructions. The officer's face went pale. Pamela lowered her finger, looked directly at Gary Fleming, and said, calm as ever, "You called the police on the wrong woman. You called the police on the wrong woman." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Officer Davis stood frozen, hand still hovering near his belt. Eyes locked on Judge Pamela Brown. Officer Mendez glanced at his partner, confused. Gary Fleming's smirk was completely gone now, replaced by something else. Uncertainty. And in a courtroom, uncertainty was blood in the water. Officer Davis's radio crackled again. Louder this time. Unit 14, this is dispatch. Internal Affairs is requesting immediate contact. Do not proceed with any detainment until you've been briefed. Acknowledge. Every eye in the courtroom turned to the officer. He pressed the radio to his ear, stepping back slightly. Copy that, dispatch. standing by. Pamela didn't move, didn't gloat, just stood there, calm, steady, in control. Gary leaned toward one of his attorneys and whispered something harsh. The attorney's face went pale. Officer Davis turned away from the bench, speaking quietly into his radio. "This is Unit 14. What's the situation?" The voice on the other end wasn't dispatch anymore. It was Lieutenant Sarah Chun, Internal Affairs. And she didn't sound happy. "Officer Davis, you are currently in courtroom 3B with Judge Pamela Brown, correct?" "Yes, ma'am. We received a call about—" "I know what you received," Lieutenant Chun interrupted. "And I'm telling you right now, do not detain that judge. Do you understand me?" Officer Davis's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, we have multiple witnesses claiming. Those witnesses are lying." Silence. "Excuse me." "Judge Brown submitted a request for a digital forensics audit 3 weeks ago," Lieutenant Chun continued. "We've been working with courthouse IT and the DA's office. What you walked into isn't misconduct, officer. It's a setup." Officer Davis's face drained of color. "A setup?" "Gary Fleming is under active investigation for evidence tampering, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The clerk who corroborated his story? She's on our list. The attorneys? We've been monitoring their communications." Officer Davis turned slowly, looking back at Gary Fleming. Gary stared back, defiant, but his hands were clenched into fists. "Lieutenant, are you telling me the judge is—" "Clean," Lieutenant Chun said firmly. "Judge Brown is clean. And if you had detained her based on fabricated testimony, you would have been complicit in obstruction. Do you understand what I'm saying, officer?" Officer Davis's throat went dry. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now step back. Apologize. And let her do her job." The radio clicked off. Officer Davis lowered his radio. Slowly, his hand moved away from his belt. He looked at Officer Mendez, who was still standing too close to the bench, too close to Pamela. "Mendez," Davis said quietly. "Step back." "What?" "Step back." Officer Mendez frowned, confused, but obeyed. Both officers took 3 steps back from the bench. The entire courtroom watched. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Pamela remained perfectly still, hands folded in front of her, expression calm. But her eyes were sharp. Officer Davis cleared his throat. "Your Honor." His voice cracked slightly. He cleared it again. "I apologize. We were given false information." Pamela tilted her head slightly. "You were given false information," she repeated, her tone measured. "And based on that false information, you were prepared to detain a sitting judge in her own courtroom without verifying the facts." Officer Davis looked down. "Yes, ma'am." "Do you understand the severity of what almost happened here, officer?" "Yes, Your Honor." Pamela let the silence stretch. Then she nodded once. Apology noted. Officer Mendez shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, we were just following orders," Pamela finished. "I understand. But let this be a lesson, Officer Mendez. Authority doesn't make someone guilty. And accusations, no matter how many people repeat them, don't make them true." "Yes, ma'am." Pamela's gaze shifted, past the officers, directly to Gary Fleming. Gary stood at the defense table, jaw clenched, eyes darting between the officers and Pamela. His attorneys were whispering frantically to each other. The clerk, Angela Persons, sat in the back, trembling, tears streaming down her face. Pamela took a slow, deliberate breath. "Mr. Fleming," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. You called the police and accused me of threatening you. You coordinated false testimony from your legal team and a courthouse employee. You attempted to have me removed from this courtroom, not because I did anything wrong, but because you're afraid of what I might uncover. Gary opened his mouth to speak. Don't, Pamela said sharply. I'm not finished. He closed his mouth. Pamela stepped down from the bench. Slowly, every movement intentional. The officers stepped aside. She walked toward the defense table. Gary's attorneys took a step back. Pamela stopped directly in front of Gary Fleming. Looked him in the eye. You thought you could manipulate this system. You thought money and connections would protect you. You thought that because I'm new, because I'm young, because I'm a black woman, you thought I could be intimidated. Her voice was quiet, but everyone heard every word. You were wrong. Gary's hands shook. Your Honor, I... Save it, Pamela said coldly. You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself. To the Ethics Board. To Internal Affairs. To the federal investigators who are now very interested in your financial dealings. One of Gary's attorneys stepped forward nervously. Your Honor, if we could just... Pamela raised that finger again. The same finger from the image. The attorney froze mid-sentence. Counselor, if you speak one more word in defense of this man's lies, I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand? The attorney nodded rapidly and sat down. Pamela turned to Officer Davis. Officer, I believe you have a phone call to make. Officer Davis frowned. Your Honor. Internal Affairs informed you that Mr. Fleming is under investigation, correct? Yes, ma'am. And filing a false police report is a crime, is it not? Officer Davis's eyes widened. Yes, Your Honor. It is. Pamela looked at Gary. Then I believe Mr. Fleming has just committed that crime. In front of 2 police officers. A gallery full of witnesses. And a courtroom recording system that captures everything. Gary's face went white. You can't. I can, Pamela said. And I am. She turned to Officer Davis. Officer, I'm formally reporting a crime. False police report. Attempted obstruction of justice. Witness tampering. I want Mr. Fleming detained pending investigation. The courtroom erupted. Gasps. Murmurs. Someone in the gallery whispered, "Oh my God." Gary stumbled backward. No. No. You can't do this. I have rights. I have. You have the right to remain silent, Officer Davis said, stepping forward, his hand now moving to his handcuffs. And I strongly suggest you use it. Officer Mendez moved to Gary's other side. Gary looked around wildly, at his attorneys, at the clerk, at the gallery. No one helped him. This is insane. Gary shouted. I run a billion-dollar fund. I have connections. You can't just. Mr. Fleming, Pamela said, her voice like ice, in this courtroom, your money means nothing. Your connections mean nothing. The only thing that matters here is the truth. She stepped closer. And the truth is, you're guilty. And today, you ran out of places to hide. Officer Davis pulled out his handcuffs. Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back. No. Gary backed toward the door. I'm not going anywhere. This is a setup. She's the one who... Mr. Fleming, Officer Mendez said firmly, blocking the exit, you need to comply. Now. Gary looked at Pamela one last time. Desperate. Furious. Defeated. You'll regret this, he hissed. Pamela didn't blink. No, Mr. Fleming. You will. Officer Davis grabbed Gary's arm and spun him around. The handcuffs clicked into place. Metallic. Final. The sound echoed through the courtroom. Gary Fleming, Hedge fund manager, millionaire, man who thought he was untouchable, stood in handcuffs in the middle of courtroom 3B. Officer Mendez read him his rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The words faded into background noise as the courtroom watched in stunned silence. One of Gary's attorneys stood. Your Honor, we request. Denied, Pamela said without looking at him. Whatever you're about to ask. Denied. She walked back to the bench, adjusted her robe, picked up her gavel. This hearing is postponed pending criminal investigation. All parties are dismissed. She slammed the gavel. Bang. The sound reverberated like thunder. Officer Davis led Gary toward the door. Gary turned back one last time, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over. Pamela met his eyes. Yes, Mr. Fleming. It is. Music swells, triumphant. Narrator. As the officers escorted Gary Fleming out of the courtroom, the gallery sat in shocked silence. Then, slowly, someone started clapping. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire gallery was on their feet, applauding. Not for a show. For justice. Pamela stood at the bench, watching. She didn't smile. Didn't wave. Didn't celebrate. She just stood there, doing what she was appointed to do. Holding people accountable. Officer Davis paused at the door. Turned back. Your Honor, he called over the applause. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. You were right. About everything. Pamela nodded once. Thank you, officer. Now please, get him out of my courtroom. Officer Davis smiled slightly. Yes, ma'am. And with that, Gary Fleming was gone. Dragged out in handcuffs. Humiliated. Exposed. Defeated. But Pamela wasn't done yet. Because there was still one person left in that courtroom who needed to be held accountable. She turned her gaze to the back of the room. To the woman sitting there, trembling, tears streaming down her face. Angela Persons. The clerk who sold her integrity for a bribe. Pamela's voice was quiet. But it carried. Ms. Persons. Stand up. Angela stood. Shaking. Barely able to breathe. Pamela stepped down from the bench again. Walked slowly toward her. The courtroom fell silent once more. And when Pamela reached her, she stopped. Looked her in the eye. Do you have anything to say? Angela's voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. Pamela nodded slowly. So am I. She turned to Marcus, the bailiff, who'd been standing quietly in the corner the entire time. Bailiff Hale, please escort Ms. Persons to security. Internal Affairs will want to speak with her. Marcus stepped forward. Yes, Your Honor. Angela broke down completely. I didn't want to. They paid me. I needed the money. Please, Ms. Persons, Pamela said, her voice firm but not unkind, we all make choices. And we all face consequences. Marcus gently took Angela's arm and led her toward the door. She sobbed the entire way out. And then finally, the courtroom was empty. Just Pamela. Standing alone. In her robe. In her courtroom. She walked back to the bench. Sat down. Took a deep breath. And for the first time that day, allowed herself to feel it. The weight. The exhaustion. The victory. She'd been tested. And she'd won. Not because she was louder. Not because she had more money. Not because she played their game. But because she was prepared. Because she was smart. Because she refused to be intimidated. Pamela Brown closed her eyes. And whispered to herself. They called the police on the wrong woman. They called the police on the wrong woman. But to understand why Gary Fleming made that fatal mistake, we need to rewind further. Not 3 weeks. Not 3 months. 3 years. Because this wasn't just about a courtroom. This was personal. And Gary Fleming's hatred for Pamela Brown didn't start when she became a judge. It started long before she ever wore the robe. Manhattan. 3 years ago. The 47th floor of the Sterling Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Italian marble. Custom furniture. Art worth more than most people's homes. This was Gary Fleming's world. His hedge fund, Fleming Capital Management, controlled over $2 billion in assets. Investments. Real estate. Political campaigns. Media companies. Gary didn't just play the game. He owned it. At 53, he built an empire on calculated risks, insider information, and knowing exactly who to pay off when things got messy. And things got messy often. But Gary always walked away clean. Always. Until her. Her name was Pamela Brown. But back then, she wasn't a judge. She was a prosecutor. Assistant district attorney in Manhattan. Young. Ambitious. And dangerously good at her job. She'd been assigned to a case that most ADAs avoided. People versus Marcus Delano, Gary Fleming's business partner, close friend, and the man who handled Fleming Capital's off-the-books transactions. Money laundering. Tax fraud. Securities violations. Marcus Delano had been sloppy. Left a trail. Got caught. And when he got caught, everyone assumed he'd take a plea deal. Serve 2 years in a white-collar prison. Keep his mouth shut. Gary made sure of it. Paid for the best defense attorney's money could buy. Called in favors with judges. Greased the right palms. Everything was handled. Except Pamela Brown didn't care about any of that. She looked at the evidence. Followed the money. Found connections no one else had bothered to look for. And she didn't just prosecute Marcus Delano. She destroyed him. 15 years. Federal prison. Asset forfeiture. And because Marcus's assets were tied to Gary's investments, the ripple effect was catastrophic. Gary Fleming lost $43 million overnight. Deals collapsed. Investors pulled out. Political allies distanced themselves. All because of one prosecutor who refused to play the game. Pamela Brown. Gary never forgot. He watched her career from a distance. Watched her leave the DA's office. Watched her take a judgeship in some small county courthouse upstate. He thought she was out of his life. He thought he was safe. And then 3 weeks ago, he got the news. Judge Pamela Brown had been assigned to his case. The embezzlement charges. The fraud accusations. The federal investigation that had been quietly building for 2 years. And the judge overseeing his pre-trial hearings? Her. Gary's first instinct was to have her removed. Conflict of interest. Prior relationship with his associate. But his lawyers told him it wouldn't work. There was no legal precedent. Pamela had prosecuted Marcus, not Gary. Technically, there was no conflict. So Gary made another plan. If he couldn't remove her legally, he'd remove her another way. He'd done it before. Judges could be intimidated, discredited, bought off. And if they couldn't be bought, they could be destroyed. That's what powerful men like Gary Fleming did. They broke people who stood in their way. But Pamela Brown? She wasn't like the others. And Gary was about to learn that the hard way. Crestwood County Jail. Holding cell. 1 hour after the courtroom incident. Gary sat on a metal bench. Hands still cuffed. Suit wrinkled. Tie loosened. His attorneys had been allowed a brief consultation. They sat across from him now, Jonathan Pierce and Diane Voss, 2 of the most expensive lawyers in the state. They did not look happy. Jonathan spoke first. His tone was clipped. Professional. But the warmth was gone. Gary, We need to talk about our representation moving forward. Gary looked up. Eyes red. Jaw clenched. The room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Diane crossed her arms. You lied to us. Gary's face hardened, but he said nothing. Jonathan leaned forward. You told us Judge Brown threatened you. You told us she was biased. You told us we had witnesses. He paused. You didn't tell us you were bribing court staff. You didn't tell us about the evidence tampering. And you sure as hell didn't tell us about the federal audit. Gary's hands tightened into fists. I didn't think. No, Diane interrupted. You didn't think. And now we're implicated. Our reputations are on the line. Our licenses are on the line. Gary stood abruptly. The handcuffs clinked. You work for me. You do what I tell you to do. Jonathan stood as well. Calm. Unmoved. We worked for you, Gary. Past tense. We're filing a motion to withdraw from your case first thing tomorrow morning. Gary's face went pale. You can't do that. We can, Diane said coldly. And we are. She picked up her briefcase. Find new counsel, Mr. Fleming. Because we're done. They walked toward the door. Gary lunged forward, but the guard stepped in, hand on his baton. Gary's voice cracked. You leave me now, and I'll make sure you never work again. Jonathan paused at the door. Turned back. Gary, you're going to prison. You don't have the power to threaten anyone anymore. The door slammed shut. Gary stood there, alone, breathing hard. And for the first time in his life, he felt it. Fear. Back in courtroom 3B. 2 hours later. Pamela had called an emergency session. Not a trial. Not a hearing. A reckoning. She'd summoned everyone connected to Gary's scheme. The people who helped him. The people who looked the other way. The people who thought their loyalty would protect them. They sat in the gallery now. Nervous. Sweating. Angela Persons, the clerk who took the bribes. Richard Tompkins, the IT administrator who altered digital logs. Claudia Marsh, another defense attorney who'd filed false motions. And at the center of it all, flanked by 2 officers, sat Gary Fleming. No longer in his tailored suit. Now wearing county-issued orange. Pamela stood at the bench. Robe crisp. Posture perfect. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence commanded the room. Pamela lifted her hand. One finger extended. The same gesture that had become iconic in the last 48 hours. She pointed at Angela Persons. Bribery. Evidence tampering. Obstruction of justice. Angela looked down, tears streaming. Pamela's finger shifted to Richard Tompkins. Unauthorized access to secured systems. Falsification of court records. Conspiracy. Richard's leg bounced nervously. Her finger moved to Claudia Marsh. Filing fraudulent documents. Witness coordination. Perjury. Claudia stared straight ahead. Silent. And then Pamela's finger landed on Gary Fleming. She held it there. Steady. Unshaking. Orchestrating all of it. Gary glared at her. Defiant. Furious. But underneath? He was breaking. Pamela lowered her hand. Folded her arms. Each of you will face criminal charges. Each of you will be investigated. And each of you will be held accountable. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of inevitability. Some of you were coerced. Some of you were greedy. Some of you were just foolish. She paused. But all of you made a choice. And now you'll face the consequences. Angela sobbed quietly. Richard stared at his hands. Claudia closed her eyes. And Gary? Gary exploded. He shot to his feet, handcuffs rattling. I'll have your career for this." His voice echoed through the courtroom. "You think you've won? You think this is over? I have connections. I have money. I will bury you." The officers moved to restrain him, but Pamela raised a hand. "Let him speak." They hesitated, then stepped back. Gary's chest heaved, face red, veins bulging in his neck. "You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing. A nobody from nowhere who got lucky. You think that robe makes you powerful? You think." Pamela's voice cut through like a blade. "You already tried." Gary stopped mid-sentence. She stepped down from the bench. Slowly, deliberately, walked until she was standing directly in front of him. Looked him in the eye. "You already tried, Mr. Fleming. And you failed." Her voice was quiet, but every person in that courtroom heard it. "You tried to bribe my staff. Failed. You tried to manipulate evidence. Failed. You tried to intimidate me. Failed. You tried to have me arrested in my own courtroom. Failed." She leaned in slightly. "You threw everything you had at me. Your money. Your connections. Your lies. And you still lost." Gary's face twisted in rage. "This isn't over." "Yes," Pamela said firmly. "It is." She turned to the officers. "Get him out of my courtroom." The officers grabbed Gary's arms. He fought, screamed, cursed, but it didn't matter. He was dragged toward the door, kicking, yelling threats that no longer carried weight. And as the doors closed behind him, his voice faded, until there was nothing left but silence. Pamela stood in the center of the courtroom, alone, victorious. She turned back to the others still seated in the gallery. "Court is adjourned. You'll each be contacted by the appropriate authorities." She walked back to the bench, picked up her gavel, and slammed it down. Bang. Final. Absolute. Justice. The gavel's echo had barely faded when Pamela returned to the bench the following morning. The courtroom was packed. Standing room only. Word had spread about what happened with Gary Fleming, and now everyone wanted to witness what came next. Journalists, law students, community members, even other judges had quietly slipped into the back rows. They all wanted to see the evidence that had taken down one of the most powerful men in the state. Pamela adjusted her robe and surveyed the room. Gary sat at the defense table in his orange jumpsuit, flanked by a court-appointed attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The confidence was gone. The smirk was gone. All that remained was a hollow shell of the man who'd tried to have her arrested just days before. She opened the session with 3 words that sent a chill through the room. "Bring in the evidence." The bailiff nodded and opened the side door. 2 people entered. The first was David Chun, the courthouse IT administrator and server technician. Mid-30s, quiet, methodical. The kind of person who noticed when a single file was out of place. The second was Dr. Evelyn Martinez, the lead digital forensics auditor Pamela had quietly hired 3 weeks earlier. She carried a tablet, a laptop, and 3 thick binders filled with printed logs. They approached the witness stand together. Pamela gestured for them to remain standing. This wasn't testimony. This was a presentation. And she wanted everyone to see it clearly. David connected his laptop to the courtroom's projection system. Within seconds, a spreadsheet appeared on the large screen mounted on the wall, rows and rows of timestamps, file names, and user IDs. The room leaned forward. Pamela stood and walked to the center of the courtroom, positioning herself where everyone could see both her and the screen. "Mr. Chun, please walk us through what you found." David cleared his throat. Clicked to the first slide. "These are the digital access logs for Case 11-47B, People vs. Gary Fleming." Every time someone logs into the court filing system, it creates a timestamp. Every time a file is uploaded, modified, or deleted, it's recorded. He highlighted a series of entries in red. These entries show that between March 10th and April 2nd, evidence files related to this case were accessed 23 times outside of normal business hours, all by the same user ID. He clicked again. A name appeared on the screen. Angela Persons. Court clerk. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Angela sat in the front row, head bowed, hands trembling in her lap. David continued. On March 14th, at 9:47 p.m., Ms. Persons logged into the system and uploaded a financial disclosure document submitted by the defense. 5 minutes later, that same document was modified, then re-uploaded. The modifications removed 3 pages of transaction records. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Pamela raised one finger. Silence fell immediately. David clicked to the next slide. A side-by-side comparison of 2 documents. Same title. Same formatting. But different content. This is the original document submitted by the defense. And this is the version that was filed into the official record. You can see here, pages 18, 19, and 20 are missing. Dr. Martinez stepped forward, her voice calm and precise. Those missing pages contained wire transfer records. Payments made from Fleming Capital Management to offshore accounts. Accounts that, upon further investigation, were traced back to court personnel, defense witnesses, and shell companies used to funnel bribe money. More gasps. Louder this time. Gary's attorney shifted nervously in his seat. Pamela walked slowly toward the screen, hands behind her back. Continue. Dr. Martinez clicked to another slide. This one showed a network diagram, names connected by lines, dollar amounts listed beside each connection. We found deleted emails between Mr. Fleming's legal team and Ms. Persons. Communication scheduling after-hours access to the courthouse. Instructions on which files to modify. And confirmations of payment. She zoomed in on one email chain. This exchange, dated March 22nd, shows Ms. Persons asking for an additional $2,000 to alter a timestamp on a witness affidavit. The response came from an encrypted email address registered to a consulting firm owned by Mr. Fleming. The room was completely silent now. Even the journalists had stopped typing. David pulled up another screen. Financial records. Between February and April, Ms. Persons received 11 deposits into her personal bank account. Amounts ranging from $1,500 to $5,000. All from the same shell company. Total, $34,000. Angela's shoulders shook. She covered her face with her hands. Pamela turned toward her. Didn't say a word. Just looked. And Angela broke. She stood abruptly, tears streaming down her face, voice cracking. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to do it. I have student loans. My mom's medical bills. They said it was just a small favor. They said no one would get hurt. She looked at Pamela, desperate. I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't know. Pamela raised her hand. Angela stopped mid-sentence. The judge's voice was quiet but firm. You knew enough. Angela collapsed back into her seat, sobbing. Pamela turned back to David and Dr. Martinez. Is there more? David nodded. He pulled up a video file. Security footage from the courthouse parking garage. Date stamped March 18th, 11:42 p.m. The video showed Angela meeting with a man in a dark suit. They stood beside a black sedan. The man handed her an envelope. She opened it, looked inside, then nodded. They spoke for less than a minute. Then she walked away. David froze the frame on the man's face. It was Jonathan Pierce, one of Gary Fleming's former attorneys. The courtroom exploded. Reporters frantically scribbled notes. Someone in the gallery shouted. The bailiff had to call for order. Gary lunged forward in his seat, face red. That proves nothing. He could have been giving her anything. You can't. Pamela's finger rose, pointed directly at him. He went silent. She didn't yell, didn't threaten, just held her finger there, steady, unwavering, and the entire room understood. When that finger moved, people listened. She lowered it slowly and turned back to the screen. Dr. Martinez, what else did you recover? The auditor pulled up a final document. A spreadsheet showing deleted financial transactions. We recovered files that had been permanently deleted from the court server. Or so someone thought. She smiled faintly. Digital deletion doesn't mean gone. It means hidden. And with the right tools, we found them. The spreadsheet showed transfers, dates, amounts, recipient accounts. Mr. Fleming made payments totaling over $200,000 to various individuals connected to this case. Court clerks, paralegals, a records administrator, even a bailiff who no longer works here. She clicked to another tab. And this is the smoking gun. An email appeared on screen. Sent from Gary Fleming's personal account to his attorney. Subject line, courthouse problem, needs handling. The body of the email was short. Judge Brown assigned to my case. Same prosecutor who buried Marcus. Need her gone. Whatever it costs. Make it happen. The courtroom went dead silent. Every eye turned to Gary. His face had gone pale. Hands clenched into fists. Pamela stepped closer to the defense table. Looked down at him. You didn't just try to intimidate me, Mr. Fleming. You planned it. You funded it. You orchestrated every piece of it. She turned to the gallery. And the evidence doesn't lie. Gary's attorney stood, fumbling with his notes. Your Honor, this is circumstantial. Emails can be faked. Transfers can be. Pamela's finger rose again. Pointed at him. He sat down. She turned back to David and Dr. Martinez. Thank you both. Your findings will be submitted to the federal prosecutor's office and entered into the official record. They nodded and gathered their materials. As they exited, Pamela stood at the center of the courtroom. Every person in that room watching her. She looked at Angela. At the empty seats where Gary's legal team used to sit. At the journalists documenting every word. And then she looked at Gary. You thought you could erase the truth. Bury it under money and manipulation. But the truth doesn't disappear, Mr. Fleming. It just waits. She paused. And today it caught up to you. Gary's breathing quickened. His eyes darted toward the exit. Toward the officers standing guard. And then he made his move. He shoved his attorney aside and bolted toward the courtroom doors. Handcuffs still on. Orange jumpsuit flapping. Running like a man who had nothing left to lose. The bailiff lunged. The officers moved to intercept. But Gary was faster than anyone expected. He slammed through the doors and disappeared into the hallway. Shouts erupted. Footsteps pounded. Pamela stood at the bench, perfectly still. She didn't chase him. Didn't panic. She simply lifted her gavel and slammed it down. The sound echoed through the chaos. And she said, calm as ever, "Bailiff, bring him back." Gary Fleming's dress shoes slapped against the marble hallway floor as he ran. The handcuffs bit into his wrists. His orange jumpsuit twisted awkwardly around his torso. But he didn't care. All he could think about was getting out. Getting away. Getting anywhere but that courtroom. Behind him, footsteps thundered. The bailiff. Court security. Voices shouting for him to stop. He didn't. He rounded the corner toward the main stairwell, breathing hard, vision tunneling. Just 30 more feet. Down 2 flights. Out the side entrance. He could disappear. Call someone. Fix this. He always fixed things. But when he reached the stairwell door, 2 courthouse security officers stepped into his path. Arms crossed. Expressions hard. Gary skidded to a halt. He spun around. The bailiff and 2 more officers were closing in from behind, trapping him in the corridor. Gary backed against the wall, chest heaving. Get out of my way. The lead security officer, a broad-shouldered man named Williams, didn't move. Mr. Fleming, you need to come with us. Now. Gary's eyes darted left, right, searching for an exit that didn't exist. You don't understand. That judge, she's setting me up. This is all a lie. I have rights. I have. Williams took a step forward. Sir, you just fled a courtroom hearing. That's another charge. Don't make this worse. Gary's face twisted with rage and desperation. Worse? Worse? Do you know who I am? I could buy this entire building. I could have all of you fired before lunch. No one flinched. Williams's radio crackled. A voice came through, sharp, authoritative. This is Lieutenant Chun, Internal Affairs. Detain Gary Fleming immediately. Federal warrant is being processed. Do not let him leave the building. Williams pressed the radio to his mouth. Copy that. Subject is secured. Gary's knees nearly buckled. No. No, you can't. The bailiff arrived, flanked by the 2 officers who'd been in the courtroom earlier. Officer Davis and Officer Mendez. The same 2 who'd almost arrested Pamela. They looked at Gary now with something close to disgust. Officer Davis stepped forward, pulling out a second set of cuffs. Mr. Fleming, turn around and place your hands behind your back. Gary pressed himself harder against the wall. I'm not going anywhere. You have no authority. This is illegal detention. I'll sue every single one of you. Officer Mendez moved to his left. Williams to his right, boxing him in. Sir, you can comply, or we can make you comply. Your choice. For a moment, Gary just stood there, breathing hard, eyes wild. A man who'd spent his entire life in control, now realizing he had none. And then he lunged. Not toward the exit. Toward Officer Mendez. A desperate, reckless shove. Mendez sidestepped easily, grabbed Gary's arm, twisted it behind his back. Gary screamed, thrashed, kicked. Officer Davis grabbed his other arm. Together, they forced him to the ground. Face pressed against the cold marble, knees digging into his back. The second set of cuffs clicked into place. Gary fought the entire time, cursing, spitting threats, promising lawsuits, ruined careers, destroyed lives. But his voice was drowned out by the sound of approaching footsteps. Pamela Brown emerged from the courtroom, robe flowing behind her, expression calm and unreadable. She walked with the kind of steady authority that made everyone in the hallway instinctively straighten. She stopped a few feet from where Gary lay pinned to the floor, looked down at him, said nothing, just watched. Gary twisted his head to see her, his face red and streaked with sweat. This is your fault. All of this. You destroyed me. Pamela's expression didn't change. Officer Davis hauled Gary to his feet. He stumbled, nearly falling again, but Mendez steadied him roughly. Gary's court-appointed attorney appeared in the hallway, pale and shaking. He held up his hands in a weak gesture of surrender. Your Honor, please. My client is clearly under extreme stress. If we could just... Pamela raised one finger. The attorney's mouth snapped shut. She turned and walked back toward the courtroom. The officers followed, dragging Gary between them. The gallery was still packed. Everyone had stayed, waiting, watching. When Pamela re-entered, the room fell silent. She walked to the bench, straightened her robe, sat down. The officers brought Gary to the center of the courtroom. He swayed on his feet, breathing hard, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Pamela picked up her gavel, held it for a moment, then slammed it down. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Order. Her voice was quiet, but it carried absolute command. Officers, take Mr. Fleming into custody. He is to be held without bail pending federal charges for bribery, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. Gary's legs gave out. The officers had to hold him upright. No, you can't do this. You don't have the authority. This is... Pamela's eyes locked onto his. I absolutely can. And I absolutely am. His court-appointed attorney stepped forward, voice shaking. Your Honor, I respectfully request. Pamela's finger rose again, pointed directly at him. He froze mid-sentence. She didn't say a word, just held the finger there. Steady. Final. The attorney slowly backed away. Pamela lowered her hand and turned to the officers. Remove him from my courtroom. Officer Davis nodded. Officer Mendez tightened his grip. They started walking Gary toward the exit. And that's when he broke completely. He twisted in their grip, screaming at the top of his lungs. You can't do this. I'll appeal. I'll have you disbarred. Pamela stood. Slowly, deliberately. She walked down from the bench, across the courtroom, until she was standing directly in front of him. The officers stopped. Gary's chest heaved. Tears of rage and humiliation streamed down his face. Pamela leaned in, just slightly, and whispered 2 words. Watch me. The officers didn't wait for further instruction. They hauled Gary out of the courtroom, his screams echoing down the hallway until the heavy doors slammed shut behind him. Silence fell. Pamela stood in the center of the room, alone, victorious. She turned to face the gallery, looked at the journalists, the law students, the community members who'd witnessed it all. This court stands adjourned. She walked back to the bench, picked up her gavel one final time, and brought it down. The sound echoed. Final. Absolute. Justice. The gavel's echo had barely faded when the first person started clapping. An older woman in the back row. Hands weathered from years of work. Eyes wet with tears. Then another person joined. A young law student. Then a journalist. Then someone else. Within seconds, the entire gallery was on its feet. Applause rolling through courtroom 3B like thunder. Not polite courtroom applause. Not the reserved, professional kind. This was raw. Emotional. Real. People clapped for justice they'd watched nearly get stolen. For a woman who'd stood alone against a system designed to protect men like Gary Fleming. For a judge who refused to be intimidated, bribed, or broken. Pamela stood at the bench, hands folded in front of her, watching the room. She didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge the applause with anything more than a slight nod. Because this wasn't about her. It never had been. It was about what she represented, what she fought for, what she refused to let powerful people take away. The applause continued for nearly a full minute before she raised her hand gently, asking for quiet. The room settled. People sat. But the energy remained, crackling, electric, reverent. Officer Davis stepped forward from where he'd been standing near the side door. His face was serious, shoulders squared. But there was something else in his expression now. Regret. He walked to the center of the courtroom, stopped in front of the bench, and removed his hat. Your Honor, I need to say something. Pamela inclined her head slightly, giving him permission. Davis took a breath. When I walked into this courtroom 2 days ago, I made a judgment. A fast one. Based on what I was told. Based on assumptions I shouldn't have made. His voice was steady but quiet. I almost arrested you. A sitting judge. In your own courtroom. Based on lies. He looked her in the eye. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Officer Mendez stepped forward as well, standing beside his partner. We both are, Your Honor. We should have verified. Should have questioned. Should have done our jobs better. Pamela let the silence sit for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice even and measured. You were manipulated, Officer Davis. You and Officer Mendez both. That doesn't excuse it, but it does explain it. She paused. What matters now is that you see the truth, and that you learn from it. Davis nodded. Yes, ma'am. We will. Pamela gestured toward the gallery. Then make sure every officer in this county understands something. Authority doesn't make someone guilty. And a badge doesn't make you right. Your job is to protect justice, not assumptions. Understood, Your Honor. The two officers stepped back, returning to their posts. Pamela's gaze shifted to the front row, where Angela Person still sat, head bowed, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. The bailiff stood nearby, waiting for instruction. Pamela's voice softened, just slightly. Ms. Persons. Angela looked up, face streaked with tears, eyes red and swollen. You made terrible choices. Choices that could have destroyed lives. Choices that betrayed the trust this courthouse placed in you. Angela nodded, unable to speak. But you also told the truth. Eventually. Pamela gestured to the bailiff. Bailiff, escort Ms. Persons to Internal Affairs. She'll cooperate fully with their investigation. The bailiff moved forward. Angela stood on shaking legs. Before she was led away, she turned back to Pamela one last time. I'm so sorry, Your Honor. I'm so sorry. Pamela didn't respond. Just watched as Angela was escorted out of the courtroom, shoulders slumped, broken. When the door closed, Pamela turned her attention to the woman standing near the prosecution table. District Attorney Rebecca Collins. Sharply dressed. Composed. But there was tension in her jaw, uncertainty in her eyes. Rebecca had built her career on winning cases. On playing the political game. On knowing when to push and when to pull back. But watching what Pamela had just done, watching her dismantle a corrupt scheme with nothing but preparation, intelligence, and courage, had shaken something loose inside her. Rebecca approached the bench. Your Honor, I want to make something clear. Moving forward, my office will conduct a full review of every case connected to Gary Fleming. Every filing. Every witness. Every piece of evidence. Her voice was firm. No more cutting corners. No more looking the other way. If there's corruption in this system, we're going to root it out. Pamela studied her for a moment. I'll hold you to that, Ms. Collins. Rebecca nodded. I know you will. She returned to her seat. The courtroom had gone quiet again. Waiting. Watching. Pamela stood and walked down from the bench. Not toward the exit. Toward the windows that overlooked the courthouse lawn. She stood there for a moment, hands clasped behind her back, staring out at the world beyond the glass. And for the first time, the people in that courtroom saw something they hadn't noticed before. The weight she carried. Because Pamela Brown wasn't just a judge. She was a woman who'd fought her entire life to get to this point. Who'd sacrificed relationships because the work consumed her. Who'd missed family gatherings, holidays, birthdays, all in pursuit of something bigger than herself. She'd grown up watching injustice. Watching people she loved get crushed by a system that didn't care about them. And she decided, at some point long ago, that she would be different. that she would fight, even when it cost her everything. Her mother had passed away 2 years before Pamela became a judge. Died without ever seeing her daughter wear the robe. Without ever knowing that all those late nights, all those struggles, all those sacrifices had led to this. Pamela had no husband, no children, no one waiting for her at home except the cases she brought with her and the battles she fought alone. She'd given everything to this courtroom, to this work, to this calling. And standing there, silhouetted against the window, the people watching her understood that. She wasn't just enforcing the law. She was living it. Pamela turned back to face the gallery. Her expression was calm, but there was something in her eyes now. Something vulnerable. Something human. I became a judge because I believed in something. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room. I believed that justice wasn't just for people with money, or power, or the right last name. She walked slowly back toward the bench. I believed that the courtroom could be a place where truth mattered more than influence, where integrity mattered more than connections. She paused at the center of the room, and I still believe that. Her eyes swept across the faces watching her. Journalists, students, officers, community members. But believing it isn't enough. You have to fight for it. Every single day. Even when people try to destroy you. Even when they call you a threat. Even when they try to strip your authority and drag you out in handcuffs. She lifted her chin. Because justice isn't bought. The room was completely silent. Justice isn't intimidated. She let the words hang in the air. And justice isn't afraid. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. And then the applause started again. Louder this time. Stronger. People stood. Some wiped their eyes. Others nodded in fierce agreement. Pamela didn't bask in it. Didn't linger. She simply returned to the bench. Picked up her gavel. And brought it down one final time. Court is adjourned. As the room slowly emptied, people filed past the bench. Some nodded respectfully. Others whispered quiet thanks. One elderly man paused, looked up at her, and said simply, "You did good, Judge. Real good." Pamela met his eyes and offered the smallest of smiles. "Thank you." When the courtroom was finally empty, Pamela sat alone at the bench. The room quiet except for the hum of the air vents and the distant sound of voices in the hallway. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel it. The exhaustion, the relief, the victory. She'd survived. She'd won. And most importantly, she'd proven that the system could still work. That justice could still prevail. That one person, standing firm in the truth, could change everything. Pamela opened her eyes, straightened her robe, gathered her files, and walked out of the courtroom with her head held high. Because tomorrow, there would be another case, another fight, another battle for justice. And she would be ready. 3 weeks later, the headlines were still running. Judge Pamela Brown exposes corruption ring in Crestwood County. Hedge fund manager Gary Fleming faces federal charges after courthouse scandal. From accused to acclaimed, how one judge stood against the system. Every major news outlet in the state had covered the story. Some went national. Cable news programs dissected the courtroom footage. Legal analysts praised Pamela's handling of the situation. Opinion pieces called her a symbol of judicial integrity. But Pamela didn't watch the coverage, didn't read the articles, didn't do interviews. She had work to do. Gary Fleming sat in a federal detention center awaiting trial. The charges were extensive: bribery, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, conspiracy, filing false police reports, witness intimidation. His attorneys, the new ones court-appointed after his expensive legal team abandoned him, were scrambling to negotiate a plea deal. But the federal prosecutors weren't interested in deals. Not this time. The evidence Pamela had uncovered had blown the case wide open. Digital forensics, financial records, deleted emails, testimony from cooperating witnesses. It was airtight. Gary Fleming was going to prison. The only question was for how long. His hedge fund collapsed within days of his arrest. Investors pulled out. Partners distanced themselves. Offshore accounts were frozen. The empire he'd spent decades building crumbled in less than a month. And the name Gary Fleming, once synonymous with wealth and power, became synonymous with corruption. Meanwhile, Angela Persons had taken a plea agreement. She would testify against everyone involved in exchange for a reduced sentence. 3 years, with eligibility for parole after 18 months. She lost her job, her reputation, her career. But she avoided the worst of what could have happened. Richard Tompkins, the IT administrator who'd altered the digital logs, wasn't so fortunate. He refused to cooperate. Insisted he'd done nothing wrong. The evidence said otherwise. He was facing up to 7 years in federal prison. Claudia Marsh, the defense attorney who'd filed fraudulent motions, was disbarred. Her law license revoked. Her career over. One by one, the people who'd helped Gary Fleming were held accountable. And the courthouse began to change. New protocols were implemented. Mandatory audits of digital systems. Oversight committees. Ethics training for all staff. The culture of looking the other way, of letting powerful people get away with corruption because it was easier than fighting, was being dismantled. Slowly, but surely. And at the center of it all was Pamela Brown. Letters arrived at her chambers daily. Handwritten notes from people across the state. Community leaders. Students. Mothers and fathers who'd watched the news coverage and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the justice system could actually work. One letter, from a woman named Maria Rodriguez, stood out. Judge Brown, my son was convicted 5 years ago in a case that always felt wrong. I never had the money to hire a good lawyer. Never had the connections to make anyone listen. I watched what you did, and for the first time, I have hope. Hope that maybe someone like you will look at his case again. Hope that justice isn't just for rich people. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for not giving up. Pamela read that letter 3 times. Then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer with the others. Because that's why she did this. Not for the headlines. Not for the applause. For people like Maria. For people who'd been crushed by a system that was supposed to protect them. The phone in her chambers rang constantly. News producers requesting interviews. Advocacy groups inviting her to speak. Politicians wanting to associate themselves with her success. She declined almost all of it. But there was one call she accepted. Judge Harold West. The same judge who'd condescended to her on her first day. Who'd implied she didn't belong. Who'd questioned her qualifications. His voice on the phone was stiff. Uncomfortable. Judge Brown, I wanted to call and, well, I wanted to say that what you did took courage. Real courage. And I was wrong about you. Pamela sat at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, letting the words settle. Thank you, Judge West. I appreciate that. There was a pause on the other end. The bench is better for having you on it. The call ended shortly after. Brief. Awkward. But genuine. And Pamela allowed herself a small smile. Because respect, real respect, wasn't given freely. It was earned. And she'd earned it. 6 weeks after Gary Fleming's arrest, Pamela walked into courtroom 3B for the first time since the hearing that had changed everything. The room felt different now. Cleaner. Lighter. Like a weight had been lifted. New staff had been hired. Clerks who'd passed rigorous background checks. Bailiffs with impeccable records. People who understood that working in this courthouse meant something more than a paycheck. It meant integrity. As Pamela entered, she noticed two familiar figures standing near the entrance. Officer Davis and Officer Mendez. They weren't on duty, weren't assigned to her courtroom, but they were there anyway. Davis stepped forward, nodding respectfully. "Your Honor, we wanted to be here. If that's all right." Pamela looked at them both, saw the sincerity in their eyes. "It's more than all right, officer. Thank you." They took their positions near the door. Voluntary protectors. Men who'd learned a hard lesson and wanted to make sure nothing like what happened to Pamela ever happened again. The courtroom filled slowly. A new case. A new hearing. Routine business. But there was something different in the way people carried themselves now. More respectful. More careful. More aware that this courtroom, and the woman presiding over it, demanded excellence. Pamela took her seat at the bench, adjusted her robe, looked out at the faces watching her, and then the side door opened. Bailiff Marcus Hale entered, followed by 3 new clerks and 2 new bailiffs. They walked to the front of the courtroom, standing in a line, nervous but determined. This was their swearing-in ceremony, the moment they would officially become part of the courthouse staff. Pamela stood, picked up the oath card, looked at each of them in turn. "Raise your right hands." They did. Pamela's voice was clear, steady, commanding. "Do you solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state, that you will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of your office to the best of your ability, and that you will uphold the principles of justice, integrity, and truth in all that you do?" The new staff answered in unison. "I do." Pamela lowered the card. And then she did something she'd done only once before in that courtroom. She raised one finger. The same gesture that had frozen a room. That had commanded silence. That had become iconic in the weeks since Gary Fleming's arrest. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a promise. She pointed at each of them, one by one, her voice quiet but firm. "You have been given a responsibility. To serve this court. To serve justice. To serve the people who walk through these doors looking for fairness in a world that often denies it to them." She lowered her hand. "Do not take that lightly. Do not compromise it. Do not let money, power, or fear make you forget why you're here." The new clerks and bailiffs nodded, eyes wide, absorbing every word. Pamela's expression softened, just slightly. "Welcome to courtroom 3B. Now let's get to work." The gallery, filled with courthouse staff and a few members of the public, erupted in applause. The new clerks and bailiffs took their positions. Marcus smiled from his post near the bench. And Pamela sat down, gavel in hand, ready to begin another day. Because the work was never finished. There would always be another case. Another fight. Another person who needed someone to stand up for them. And Pamela Brown would be there. Not because she sought power, but because she understood what power was really for. Later that evening, long after the courthouse had emptied, Pamela sat in her chambers. Files spread across her desk. A cup of tea cooling beside her laptop. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the messages. Texts from Sophia Martinez, the law clerk who'd helped with the audit, now working in the public defender's office. A voicemail from Rebecca Collins, updating her on the Fleming prosecution. An email from Marcus, checking in. She replied to each one. Brief. Professional. But warm. Because these were her people now. Her team. Her family in a profession that often felt isolating. Pamela set the phone down and looked around her chambers. At the law books lining the shelves. At the framed copy of the Constitution on the wall. At the nameplate on her desk that read HON. Pamela J. Brown. She'd fought so hard to get here. And they'd tried to take it from her. Tried to destroy her before she'd even really begun. But they failed. Because Pamela Brown wasn't just a judge. She was a force. A symbol of what the system could be when people refused to let corruption win. And in trying to take her power, Gary Fleming and everyone who helped him had done something they never intended. They'd revealed it. To the courthouse. To the community. To the state. And to Pamela herself. She stood. Turned off the lights in her chambers. Locked the door behind her. And walked out into the night, knowing that tomorrow, she'd do it all over again. Because justice wasn't a destination. It was a choice. Made every single day. By people brave enough to stand for it. And Pamela Brown would never stop standing. They tried to take her power. Instead, they revealed it. The story of Judge Pamela Brown, the woman who refused to be intimidated, who stood alone against corruption, and who proved that one person, armed with truth and courage, could change everything. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because real change starts when we refuse to stay silent. And justice? Justice is always worth fighting for. Until next time, this is your reminder: stand firm. Stand strong. Stand for what's right. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If this touched your heart, then you're going to love the next one. It's just as powerful, and even more intriguing than you can imagine. So don't stop here. Check out more videos on my channel and continue the journey. I'll be waiting for you on the other side of that story. See you there.